Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Lombardi. I'm a director in TuneCore's Entertainment Relations Department. I'm based in Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining us today for our TuneCore live sessions from streaming to sync, how publishing administration helps collect your songwriter royalties and land you placements on TV, movies, and more. We'd like to introduce our big panel of guests today. We're joined by Chris Dampier, Director of Publishing and Sync for TuneCore. Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys. Hi.
Brian Crane, composer and pianist or piano player, who recorded his first album in 1996. He's based in Northern Idaho. Brothers Rob and Mike Silverman. Rob is the president of Autumn Hill Records. He's also an author, a drummer, and a composer. And Mike is a composer and pianist and a festival promoter for different events throughout the Midwest, music events, and is in a band with his brother called Bach to the Future. CJ, thanks for joining us. CJ King.
Hello.
With us from Atlanta. He is a faith-based hip-hop artist. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Would anybody like to add anything onto their intro? Okay, good. I want to let anybody know that at the end of our session, probably about 15 minutes before the end, you're going to be able to ask Q&A questions. So, or you can ask them throughout by clicking on that little Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to take those questions the last 15 minutes of our webinar. So today we're talking about publishing and sync licensing, and distributing an original song is the first part, but we want to make sure that you're collecting revenue and royalties from all the places that you should be getting paid for your song. So I'm going to start with some questions for Chris Dampier, because publishing can be a confusing topic, and we want to make sure that we have a baseline of definitions for everybody listening out there. So, Chris, I would actually like to hear more about, because you have just recently joined TuneCore, can you tell us a little bit more about where you came from?
Sure. Well, originally from a city in England called Lincoln. I grew up there and was a performing musician, a drummer, mainly on the function circuits. Then I moved down to London and realized I wasn't going to quite make it at the top level as a musician, so I started to focus on the business.
Cool.
From there in London, I worked for SoundCloud for a short while. I worked for a publisher called Cayman Music. I then moved out to the States. Cayman Music was Bob Marley's first publisher, by the way. I moved out to the States and started working for Universal Music Publishing, where I was for 4 years. And then I took over licensing at a small record label production library called CMH Records. And then did a couple of years at the performing rights organization BMI before jumping ship to TuneCore in February of this year, where I now head up the publishing arm for TuneCore.
Great. Well, I'm glad that we have such an expert in the field to be talking about this topic, because it can be very confusing. So let's just start with, what is music publishing?
I mean, well, simply put, it is it's the business of making money from the music that you write. When music is due commercially, the songwriter and the copyright owner is owed royalties. So what we should also talk about what publishing isn't.
Okay.
It's not the administration of a sound recording. So it's very important to acknowledge the difference between what a sound recording and a composition is. When you record a song that you've written, you're actually creating two unique copyrights. So one in the sound recording and one in the underlying composition. So think of the master sound recording as being a recording of a performance, and the composition as being the underlying chords, melody, lyrics, etc. If you think about, if we look at the Beatles, for example, and as a Brit, I need to get a Beatles reference in at any given opportunity. But if you think of the song Yesterday, written by Paul McCartney, I think it's in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the most recorded song in history. So there's only one song, it's written by Paul McCartney and John Lennon, but there are 3,000 to 4,000 different recordings of it. So every time there's a new recording released, Paul McCartney and the estate of John Lennon get paid. So that's a good way of thinking about the two different two different copyrights that you create.
Great. And while we're at it, what is a copyright?
Well, it's essentially a set of rights that are granted by law to the owner of a musical work. And those rights ultimately allow you to collect royalties for the use of your copyright. And just to clarify, pursuant to the US Copyright Act, once a work is in a fixed form, once you've got a song in a fixed form, i.e. you've recorded it to an MP3 or a CD, or it's written down, you are protected under US copyright law. We would advise that you might register something with the Copyright Office or sign up with TuneCore Publishing, because that's a good way of solidifying that there's a record of your work. But it's copyrighted from the minute that it's in a tangible form.
Great. What rights are granted by copyrights?
So you essentially get the right to reproduce, adapt, publish, perform, and display your copyright. So in layman's terms, as a copyright holder, you've got the exclusive right to allow someone to distribute or license it for film and television. So any individual wanting or entity wanting to do that, they'll need a license to do so. And another thing, as a copyright owner, you can assign somebody the right to administer those rights for you, which is where publishers come in.
So what is a license with respect to music publishing?
So it's essentially simply a legal agreement that grants an individual or an entity various permissions to use music in a variety of circumstances, but it also obligates certain responsibilities to the licensee, the person licensing or company licensing the music, to ensure that payment is received and accounting. So any use of a composition commercially, as I said earlier on, requires a license of sorts. So whether it's on Spotify or Apple Music, or it's in your local bar or restaurant that's utilizing your music, or your local concert venue, they require a license to do so.
Okay, that's like when you see a BMI sticker or an ASCAP sticker on a door of a bar or something like that, right?
Say again, you cut out, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So what are different royalties that songwriters get paid from their composition?
So I think it's probably important to point out how songwriters get paid as well. I mean, the payment sources are varied, multiple, and they stretch far and wide. Each territory around the world has its own collection society, which we'll dig into a little bit more later on. They have their own formulas governed by local rules and regulations. And then the source of the payment and the associated rates will differ considerably. So, the royalties earned for a broadcast on the radio will differ to, a payment for a broadcast on television, just as a payment for music played at a concert venue will be different to, a bar, for example. Furthermore, these rates that are paid out are renegotiated periodically, so they're liable to change kind of at any given time. It's just an important caveat to make. As far as the type of royalties that are paid, I guess there are three main real areas to focus in on nowadays. It's performance royalties, mechanical royalties, and micro sync royalties, which is something not necessarily talked about a lot, but a significant source of revenue for people, and certainly in 2019. Performance is a very, very broad term, covering literally millions and millions of businesses who use music every day. It simply put, it means an instance where music is performed publicly. So that could be, you performing it live, or another artist performing your song live, but it could also be broadcast on television or, on radio. So, examples would be television, which is not to be confused with sync fees, which we'll dig into a little bit later on, but terrestrial radio, AM, FM, internet radio, such as Pandora and Sirius XM, and then, bars, restaurants, gyms, supermarkets, etc. The mechanical royalty generated whenever a song is reproduced. So it's an old-fashioned term. It kind of sounds a bit archaic, and it harks back to the days of piano rolls made for player pianos. But it essentially means every time a royalty is paid every time a song is reproduced in various types of media. So ringtones are mechanical, digital downloads are mechanical, and then physical record sales such as CD and vinyl, but also interactive streaming such as Spotify and Apple Music, etc. They have a mechanical royalty obligation. So there is a statutory mechanical royalty rate, and this rate is actually set by the Copyright Royalty Board. They meet every 3 years to determine and set the rates. And currently for digital downloads, it's 9.1 cents for digital downloads and physical product. For ringtones, it's 24 cents. And then the interactive streaming rate is a bit of a complicated formula based on a percentage of revenue from the digital service, you know, such as Spotify, less performance royalties. So we won't really dig into that too much. But the main thing to focus on, there is a mechanical royalty obligation. Whenever you distribute a song through TuneCore, you're distributing it to Spotify, Apple Music, and 150 stores worldwide. You're getting paid 100% of the sound recordings through. But it's important to know that there is a performance royalty obligation and a mechanical royalty obligation, which we'll dig into in a few more minutes. The last thing, just before I harp on about it too much, is microsync. Now, microsync, it's essentially the same concept as licensing for film and television, the synchronization of music to moving image, but on a much larger scale. So platforms like YouTube and TikTok are great examples of microsync licensing. So we're really referring to user-generated content, cat dancing in the kitchen, or lyric videos and that kind of thing. Millions and millions of hours of content are uploaded constantly to YouTube. So it's a really, it's a big task to administer all these rights, and it takes sophisticated. So
I think you just said it takes
songwriters are getting paid and everything's getting monetized as much as possible, but it's a very, very important source of revenue, performance and a mechanical royalty obligation as well. So they're the main three areas that we should probably focus in on. You also get print royalties from sheet music, and if somebody samples your work, or if you license music to Broadway or the West End, there's all these other areas that we could dig into, but the main three: performance, mechanical, and microsync.
Okay, so everyone that's listening, I just want to say again, this is a really complex topic. So if you have any questions for our Q&A, please click the icon at the bottom of the screen. We also have a lot of FAQs on our site to go down a further rabbit hole about publishing administration and publishing in general. It is really complex. I laughed when Chris said micro sync. We don't want to go into that because it's really complex, as if the rest of this isn't complex. So I'm with you.
Can I say something about that, Amy? Sorry.
Sure.
Because what he's been talking about. I used to know all that stuff, and then I signed up with TuneCore Publishing and said, I don't want to have to think about that because it is that ridiculous. And I literally did it, every single one of those things on my own, and it was a time drain. Really amazing.
It's like another job.
Not to be an overly advertising, but I spent all summer at my lake house because I didn't have to do anything with work, because TuneCore Publishing is dealing with it. I mean, that's, sorry, I know that's sounds really lame.
Humble brag.
That's
great.
The truth.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. It is. It's another job, and it's another thing to learn how to do. So let's break down. There's a lot of talk about like publishing, but can you break down for everybody who's listening, Chris, like what that means, like what type of publishing agreements exist when somebody says, there's like a publishing deal, there's a co-publishing deal, there's publishing administration. Can you break that down for everybody who's listening?
Yeah, so really nowadays, you'll hear the most common kind of agreements that you'll come across at the minute is an administration agreement and then a co-publishing agreement. So an admin agreement, which is the agreement that TuneCore offers, and it wasn't really until the last few years that administration agreements were available to everybody, which is the case now through TuneCore. But essentially, in an admin agreement, songwriter retains ownership of their copyrights, and then pays the publisher in the form of a commission for administering those rights. So you retain copyrights. They're normally a pretty short term. I mean, with TuneCore, it's a 12-month period. They can last up to 3 years, but not with TuneCore. And a publisher handles all the administration that Brian said. We take all that headache away and register the song, account to you quarterly. And then typically in an admin agreement, there isn't a creative service, but with TuneCore, we do provide.
I just want to let you know that you froze for a second. Could you just repeat that last?
Oh, of course. So there is, I don't know where I got, typically there's not there's not creative services included within administration agreement. But with TuneCore, we actually do provide synchronization. So segue nicely into what a co-publishing agreement is. It's essentially you're giving up a portion of your copyright to a co-publisher for the life of copyright. And you'll be locked into a fixed term for 3 to 5 years. And typically you get an advance in return for doing that. In addition, for giving up a percentage of copyright and being locked in for so long, there's creative services that need to be provided. Of course, sync. So your music needs to be listed for film and TV placements, but also co-writing, songwriting sessions. They want to put you in other rooms with other writers and then plugging your songs to artists to record and then release them. So they're the kind of main two. The other thing is an exclusive songwriter agreement, which sometimes is referred to as staff writer agreement, where you're almost paid a salary. You get a regular advance, and you're writing music that is owned by or for the course of the contract goes to the publisher exclusively. Something else I think that a lot of people should be conscious of, certainly with the way the modern music industry works, is the work for hire agreement. This is particularly common in the film and TV space, and we've got some, illustrious composers on the panel today. It's very common in the film and TV space, and it's becoming increasingly common in the hip hop community, where somebody is, looking to buy a beat from you. If you sell a beat to somebody, it's a work for hire agreement. You're surrendering all ownership of your songwriter rights, so you're not necessarily going to get any. You're not going to get any royalties on the back end, and it's just something to be conscious of when talking about publishing agreements, because they're phrased as being a publishing agreement. I've certainly come across it, but they're not really. I mean, you're giving up ownership of your publishing when you're working with a work for hire agreement. What type of deal you enter into, it really depends on where you're at in your career. Somebody will probably come knocking at the door when the time is right for a co-publishing or exclusive songwriter agreement. And it depends, you might not need all those services. In the meantime, though, if you are looking to graduate, for want of a better term, later on down the line, it's worthwhile setting up with a publishing administrator, because your music is global from the minute that you release it, and you want to make sure that the works are getting registered. And then, you're only committing to an admin agreement for 12 months. There is prime opportunity to move on to other things in the future if someone comes knocking.
Yeah, and it's important because there are so many different royalty streams and revenue streams from a song and a composition that it's important to make sure that you're earning all of them at all times.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier PRO, and so I want to just make sure everybody knows what a PRO is, which stands for Performing Rights Organization. And I know in the UK it's called a PRS. So can you share that?
Yeah, so a PRO simply is a company that administers performance royalties exclusively. So in the States, the main two are ASCAP and BMI. They've got over 90% of the market over here. They're not-for-profit companies. And they're by law, they're only able to administer performance royalties. So essentially what a PRO does is they issue blanket licenses to businesses. It could be Spotify, it could be a TV network like ABC or Netflix or a local bar or a restaurant or a concert venue like Madison Square Garden or anywhere. They issue blanket licenses to these entities and then collect performance royalties. And there's roughly 150 worldwide. So, Amy mentioned the PRS in the UK, you've got SARSM in France, SOCAN in Canada, ESCAI in Spain. Each territory has a different collection society with different rules and regulations. So really, they're just in the business, certainly in the US, of only administering performance royalties.
And I know that everybody gets asked this question a lot. What's the difference between a PRO and a publishing administrator? And do I need both? And I would like to hear your answer to that, Chris.
I mean, the short answer is yes, you absolutely need both. If you don't have both, you're going to be losing money. It's a common misconception, as you hinted at, that ASCAP and BMI or your PRO is collecting all of your publishing income, but they're not. I mean, they only collect publishing performance royalties. Sorry. So, ultimately, what that means, taking Spotify as an example, you distribute a track on TuneCore. You're signed with BMI, so you're getting your master royalties, your sound recording royalties, and you're getting your performance royalty. missing out local royalty. Because unless you have a publisher, there's nobody collecting those royalties. And that can be about 71% of your publishing income. So it's fairly significant. The other thing to consider is that PROs are more reactive, not proactive when it comes down to getting money from overseas territories, whereas a publisher is proactive. So you absolutely need both. A PRO and a publisher works in tandem with the performing rights organization to maximize performance royalties. And I think Brian actually had a little anecdote before we came on that he received a chunk of change the minute he signed up with TuneCore as a result of that from an overseas PRO.
That was in Canada. I received a $4,000 check from a Canada PRO just the month after I signed up, and I had no idea that my music was even listened to in Canada, let alone that money was sitting there.
What we do is we register works direct with territories, whereas if you're just with a PRO, you're registering the works with the PRO, and then the overseas PROs are looking to find your work within the US database, essentially, just simplifying it a little bit. If you sign up with a publishing administrator, they are going out there and directly registering your works with these other societies overseas. So it maximizes royalties and increases the potential for your catalog. So absolutely, you need to have both.
Okay. And just to mention again that PROs and publishing administrators do work together. They don't work against each other. So you don't have to worry about one canceling out the other. Guys, we're almost through the definition portion of our webinar. So I'm going to get to you shortly. So now can we talk about sync licensing? And you said that it's a creative service within the umbrella of publishing. And you also already kind of mentioned that it stands for synchronization, and it's when a video is synchronized with music. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that definition?
I mean, you just think, yeah, any use of audio visual, with synchronization of music. So it's movies, TV shows, commercials, video games, wherever you see moving image with music, that's the business of synchronization.
And how does the money end work in sync licensing?
Yes, it's an important sector, an important issue to discuss, because there are actually two sets of revenue on the publishing side. So typically you're going to receive a one-off fee for licensing, and that would be for a synchronization license. And then there's also the master license as well for the other copyright. But on the publishing side, it's a synchronization license. And there's no statutory royalty rates, like there's no rates that are set by the government like there is for mechanical. It's a free market negotiation. So ultimately what happens is, a production company would hire a music supervisor, they will choose the music, they then go out there and try to license this music from a publisher. And within the license that is negotiated, there will be language, or you should always ensure that there is language in that license that allows you to collect the residual performance royalty that's derived from the broadcast. So you license a song to This Is Us, I forget what network it is on, but say it's on ABC, it's broadcast on ABC. You've already received the sync fee up front, then there's the performance royalty that is collected by your PRO, and then is paid through the writer share direct to you and the publisher share to the publisher. So it's an important thing to consider that there are two. There's an upfront fee, and then there's a residual royalty. And the residual royalty comes from a cue sheet that is prepared by the production studio or the music supervisor that is submitted to, and that document basically tracks all of the music used in a TV show and the type of music, and the use, whether it's a background instrumental or if it's the theme or whatever, and it features the songwriter information and the publishing information. You need to make sure that document is submitted to the PRO so you can collect the residual income that is due every time it's broadcast.
It's one of the most boring thing for artists and songwriters is filling out all of this paperwork for your copyrights and for your publishing, but it's so important. And I'm just going to throw in there, it's really important that there aren't any spelling errors when you're talking about who gets paid, because there could be some money sitting around for Roe Silverman instead of Rob Silverman. So just make sure that you double check your work.
I'm collecting for Roe Silverman.
We actually, as long as the registrators, when works are submitted to us, we're actually doing a lot of these checks. So we'll be checking the registrations with the societies for accuracy. That's why we maximize royalties. That's part of the value service with signing up with a publisher. We take the registration, we make sure everything is registered correctly, because if something, if Bruce Springsteen is spelled EI instead of EE, guess what? That money's not getting matched, and that money sat somewhere. So, we make sure that those registrations are accurate, and we go find any money that could potentially be out there.
I can't stress that enough, especially in the age that we're living in, where metadata is so important, that you really just want to make sure that your metadata matches everywhere across the board. So when we talk about sync licensing, what kind of licenses do we need specifically for that? Like which is what TuneCore would handle, or a publishing administrator would handle? Yeah,
I mean, we issue a sync license, and if it's a distributed client, we'll issue a sync and a master use license for the 2 copyrights, but it's essentially a sync license. There's not really much else in play. I think things to consider, and I'm aware that I've been kind of monopolizing this conversation somewhat, but there are things to consider in determining how much you pay for a sync license. The type of use, the duration, the scope of rights, the type of media, the territory, this is all a consideration when you're negotiating a sync license. How important is the song to the narrative of the TV show? Is it a featured use? Are they performing it on camera? Is it really contributing to the emotion, of the film or the TV show or the scene? Is it going out to a local DIY store, or is it going on a major network and then being distributed around the world? And what's the marketing opportunity for the song? There's a myriad of considerations that, you really need a specialist to handle this for you. And obviously we have a team here at TuneCore. All publishers do. They have a sync team, or good publishers will have a sync team that can procure these rights and negotiate these licenses for you. Because, we'll get it so often that an artist has negotiated something direct, and then they come to us and say, hey, we go, well, let us just pick up the conversation, and we increase the fee that they receive, because we've got a team that, do this day to day. So it's definitely something to be aware of. It's a great opportunity for writers and artists, but it's something to, be really, really conscious of when negotiating those fees.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an attorney in a way, where you would want a professional to handle something, or a doctor. It does help knowing the current rates, as well, what things are going for, because it is a free market, like you said. So to bring the rest of our guests back into our conversation, you've all had several songs used in sync licensing. I'd love to, we can go down the line. We'll start with Brian first. Have you noticed any similarities in the songs that have been chosen from your catalog?
It's probably more of the more minimalistic sounds, the more amelodic stuff that I do tends to be picked up by TV kind of stuff. Typically, if it has too much melody in it, then they want it because it's that particular song. But then a lot of my other stuff that I license, it's just purely background music, and they don't want to recognize what the song is.
Right.
So it's kind of nice to have to work with both things.
CJ, how about you? Have you noticed any similarities in the songs that you've had placements with?
Yeah, similar to what Brian said. Actually, a lot of mine, the ones that tend to get placements are the ones that tend to do well on radio also. So from what I've learned about that, it seems like the ones that make people feel a certain, like it creates a mood, seems to be the ones, not the ones a lot of artists write for concerts and how it's going to make people react in concerts. Now I tend to write for, okay, what scene can I see this in? Like what emotions does this cause? So I've seen that similarity quite often now.
Interesting. That's one of my other questions, is kind of like, have you ever tried to write specifically for a scene, or from a requested sound or description?
Yeah, and I will actually now, because I built a relationship with the TuneCore team. if I submit a song for publishing, sometimes I will also even just detail a little bit of what type of scene this song may be good for. And that's after, you build that relationship. But if it's a very love, soft, melodic song, sometimes it'll fit perfect for a certain type of scene. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm making music, and not just try to do it just for, just to make a song. So I have songs like that, but I try to be mindful of that.
You have strategies. Mike and Rob, you guys have had a ton of placements between the two of you. Rob as a drummer, Mike as a pianist. I know, Rob, you had a lot of works in The Leftovers. What do you notice about the songs that belong to you that are getting placed?
You know what I've noticed is that the slower songs seem to get more placement for some reason. The slower, more spacious songs, at least when it comes to these kinds of things that are creating a background mood or a scene, particularly when it comes to drumming stuff and hand drumming.
Also, he uses a lot of sort of exotic drum sounds, and they're sort of as like Brian said, they since it doesn't have a melody, it's the kind of thing that fits in a lot of places. He had some in some spots for So You Think You Can Dance and things like that. So it just makes it like this. The pure drumming really works. Some of my minimalist piano pieces seem to get used a lot for things. So yeah, there is something to that. That if they are not an upfront musical piece, if it fits into a scene and it sets a mood rather than working as it's a standalone piece of music, that seems to work real well. So
there are exceptions, however. You had the Pop Goes the Weasel in something,
right? In 2.5 Men, they had a scene. They wanted a children's song, but they wanted it to be sort of a sentimental rendition of it. And so I did a whole album of music like that. They were just children's songs, but redone in a way that sort of adult new age listeners would like. And that also seems to work well for that kind of a scene. But that's not specifically why I recorded it, but it worked great.
But again, it was slow.
It was slow.
Right.
It was very slow.
So you're talking about a cover song that you created a new arrangement for.
Right. That's something I commonly do. I've always really liked doing that kind of thing, and it works well for syncing too.
And keep in mind that if I think Pop Goes the Weasel is probably a public domain song at this point, but if it was, somebody else would be getting royalties from that song that Mike recorded because Mike didn't write it.
Right. I do a lot of public domain, old melodies, things from the 1800s and so on. Pretty much all the holiday music we've ever recorded were really, really old holiday pieces. We don't do, Santa Claus is Coming to Town because somebody owns that and it's just a big headache. But, like Carol of the Bells is one, and so on. Those kind of pieces are great, and they get used for sync licensing. So.
Interesting. Yeah, and public domain just means that the song has been around for so long. I don't know the exact definition.
So
tell you that it means the song has been around long enough.
It means that it's either written before 1923 or the composer has been gone for 50 or 70 years, depending on something. That's sort of a new rule. But it used to be 50 years past the death of the composer. Now, thanks to Disney, some things are protected for 70 years. But anyway.
Okay.
That's also a rabbit hole.
And now in the way the rights can be way more easily attained, we don't have to go through Harry Fox anymore. And because most things are streamed, you don't actually have to get a specific license. So I've actually found that I've done some covers of recent stuff just because, like with you, Mike, I didn't do stuff that wasn't in the public domain just because it's such a headache.
Right.
But now it's a lot easier to do that kind of stuff because a lot of those rights are taken care of.
Right.
By TuneCore and they're more, in my opinion, they're a little bit more lucrative than the public domain because people avoid doing public domain or non-public domain in the past. So you're kind of more open to it. But And that'll change too.
Right.
It changes so fast.
Chris, did you have your hand up? I don't want to go down a public domain wormhole, but so Mike,
let's not go down that path. Let's move it on.
yeah. So Ryan, I wanted to ask you: do you ever use certain titles to title your music, or use search options as a way to have your music be more discoverable?
Yeah. So back in the wild west of iTunes and back when the CDs kind of started to die, the iTunes search engine was a closed search. So if you typed in, and Michael knows this well, massage music, back then there was like 3 albums that had the title massage music in it.
Right.
Not only would you come up on iTunes, but because of the closed search and the power of iTunes, you come up on Google. Whereas if you just put in your website massage music, that you wouldn't. I mean, Google would never find, because there's 100 million pages with massage music on the page. But iTunes was powerful, so it came up under iTunes, but buy this album on iTunes, and then also when you're in iTunes, when you search for it. So that kind of, for us, became a super important way to market our music. So whenever
How did you use it?
just by titling the songs in ways that were useful. One of the most important things a piece of information that I heard was back in 1998. But at that time, 9 of the 10 classical albums, 9 of the 10 most popular classical albums were sold by and repackaged by Victoria's Secret. So, I mean, that meant that people were buying classical music for a mood, for a purpose, for a reason, obviously. So if you...
So it was titled more like a playlist, like...
Yeah, it's more like a playlist, yeah.
Let's go for workout music or something like that.
And most of the time, I think with most musicians, the reason that part of my success is that I don't have any ego in my music. So where people want to have ownership of everything, I can call a song massage music and be okay with it. But other people are like, well, no, I have to call that, this thing that means nothing, because they get so married to it, which there's a business of music, and business is 9/10 of it. That's why the record companies used to make 9/10 of the profit.
Right.
But
so I want to ask Chris, CJ, have you ever considered this when titling your songs?
I have. It's one thing it's a little bit different for me being in the hip hop field. I do keep that in mind though when I am titling. Yeah, exactly. So I have to be a lot more careful about how I do it, because I can get buried in the list. So it's a little bit different with hip hop. I have to be even with album titles, song titles, I have to be very specific about what I name them.
Interesting. What's been the biggest benefit to using publishing administration? We can kind of go down the line. We'll start with the Silverman brothers as you're listed.
I would say, first of all, it's obviously helped us to get a whole lot of money that we could not get. I mean, Brian was talking earlier before the webcast, about how we spent a lot of time tracking those things down. We didn't even do that. We signed up for SCAP and we just hoped that they would send us money, and they basically didn't. We got a couple of small checks, and we just thought, well, there's nothing there. But as soon as we signed up, we started to see quarterly checks. It's made a big difference in the business, and we've learned a lot. And just by looking at our statements, we learned, oh my goodness, I can't believe this has been played. This music's been played in so many places. Another thing is that there's part of the Spotify payment that comes as a streaming royalty, and part of it comes as a publishing royalty. And we didn't know that until we started seeing other Spotify money.
Like a mechanical royalty.
A mechanical and a
mechanical streaming, I guess.
Yeah, so you have a composition and a performance, and
right.
Again, that's what Chris was talking about earlier. And as you can tell, I really get confused between all of them, but I don't have to worry about it because you guys take care of it. So I'm kind of here to be a testimonial for this incredible thing for $75 that we signed up for that has generated a lot of our income. And also the sync licenses.
Right.
I mean, that's been huge because we would do syncing before, not like we're getting now though, where we just find out that music is being played in all kinds of places,
and we wouldn't know what to ask, what the price would be for something for a movie or an HBO thing. We would say $200, and we would be honored that they would use it.
Right, and now hundreds have been thousands, and so on.
Right.
So it's just great, and obviously with like Rob's music and Leftovers, that's turned into multiple placements through that series, and it's because somebody who knows what they're doing is handling it. So,
and the cool thing is we can now add that to our resumes.
Right.
My music was heard on this and that, whereas that would have never happened.
Right.
I have an interesting anecdote that goes with that. I had a friend who was doing the family Olympic thing. So when an Olympic star would be ready to go, they would go back and shoot just like how their family was and their history. And he wanted to use my music desperately. And this is before I was with TuneCore Publishing. And Sony would not accept the license that I would give them because it just wasn't professional enough. And I went on the internet and printed out the forms that, so, this is a professional form. And they say they're not going to do it. And that's a huge deal to be in the Olympics, and we just basically lost it.
Yeah.
But if I would have had TuneCore Publishing at that time, it would have been easily make a license for them. But
also, if I could say, when sometimes I would get email requests that say, "Hey, can we use your music in this or that?" And I just send them straight to TuneCore, and I don't have to worry about. And it takes time to even make a deal. And since I can send them straight to TuneCore, and then I know that somebody's on the case, and I can forget about it. So that's another real big advantage.
Absolutely.
So since we're kind of on that tip, I want to make sure that we're mindful of the questions that we've gotten from everybody else who's out there listening. Chris, what's your advice for artists looking to get their music placed in sync licensing?
I wouldn't necessarily. A lot of people think, well, maybe I should start writing with sync in mind, and I don't think that's the case. I think, if it depends on what kind of artist you are, but ultimately just write what's authentic and organic. That's the main piece of advice. But do have one kind of eye on it. If you this type of music that gets placed, and I'll let the guys kind of jump in because they're the actual musicians, but lyrically it needs to be quite generic. You can't really be singing or rapping about something very specific. So think about that. And if you're writing for an ad, if you want to get ads, it needs to be a bit more high octane, high energy. Another thing to be considerate of is just, this is something service that we provide, as a sync agent. But it's making sure that all the metadata is in order. Making sure it's tagged appropriately within the body of the file. But also, you as musicians and artists recording, you got to make sure that you have the instrumental version of your tracks. So because we might get a license and they say, well, we want to use the instrumental and only this part of the lyric of the vocal. So you need to have those, and you've got to make sure you've got high resolution versions like WAV files. So that's the main things to be aware of, is just make sure you've got the assets for us. So if you're submitting music for us to consider to go out pitch, we're going to come back to you and say, look, do you have the WAV file? Do you have the instrumental? Because if you don't, we're not really able to go and solicit that music. So it's definitely something to be considerate of. And obviously the quality, literal quality, the audio quality needs to be high if it's going to be placed in a multi-million-dollar TV show or film.
Sure.
I'm sure the guys can
what advice do you have?
No, he's absolutely right. When I first started with TuneCore, I got those emails saying, hey, do you have the instrumentals for this? The the wave files, the vocal files, and I had to make sure I have all of that in line in order to make that happen. So that is super key. That, I mean, you can't just have just one flat MP3 file and not have any of the small details. Otherwise, it's not much that TuneCore can do with it. So that's right on point. That's probably the most vital point right there. Make sure you have your stuff in line.
One other quick point that's very, very important, especially with nowadays, a song. Know who your co-writers are. And, there might be scenarios that come up where, a music supervisor can't find 5% of a song or 1% of a song. And then the license collapses because they don't know who it is. You can't just notify the copyright office like you can for a mechanical, just say, hey, we've done a version of this. For a film TV placement, we need to know 100% of the master and 100% of the song, the composition. So really, really good to have an idea of who your co-writers are and know what the exact.
I think just one thing I want to say about the composition part of it. If you're writing something for placement, you always want to be considering writing specific, but then being broad at the same time. So you always, whenever I create a piece of music, I want it to have. I think about what specific mood I want to create, but then I also want it to be accessible to be used by anybody. It's just basically a good business sense always. If you're going to be a shirt company, you want to hit a certain market really, really hard, but then also be available to sell it to everybody else, because that core group of fanatic audience is the one that gets the fire started. Then the rest of them can. But if you're only specific to that one audience, that can only go so far.
Yeah.
I want to open it up to our audience Q&As, and if everybody could just I'm going to say the question, and if you think that you'd like to answer it, can you just raise your hand and let me know? So we have one from Alyssa, and she asks, can a publishing administration company register copyrights for songwriters, and should they?
I mean, some publishers do, but the onus is on the songwriter to do so. I mean, we don't register copyrights with the Copyright Office, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to get paid. And vice versa. If you register with the Copyright Office, that doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden you're administered. All you're doing is keeping a record with the Copyright Office. So it's definitely something that's worthwhile doing. It doesn't really inhibit you too much, but like I said earlier on, it's a great alternative to prove ownership by registering with a publisher as well. Just so there's from the minute that you create a work, it's in tangible form. But if you have it published and it's out there in the marketplace, and it's that all further solidifies your case for proving ownership of a song. But I would absolutely recommend you register with the Copyright Office. It's like, you can do it online, and I think you can register up to 10 songs for about $50 or something like that.
Okay. So James asked if TuneCore Publishing submits information to the artist PRO, or if that is something that the artist / songwriter needs to do on their own.
I mean, I would always register your works direct as well, but we handle the registration of works on behalf of songwriters. But it can never hurt to just make sure that you go on and register those works yourselves too. But that's essentially what you're paying for, is the publishing administration service, is for the publisher to go and register these works worldwide. I would recommend with your local PRO having a relationship with them, so registering your works, because a performing rights organization is a lot more than simply a company that administers royalties. If you're Taylor Swift and you're into BMI, you don't really need much in the way of creative services from BMI or ASCAP. But if you're an up-and-coming songwriter, they have these creative teams that can provide advice to you. You might not have a manager yet. You might not have an agent. You might not have representation, but you need career advice. Obviously, TuneCore is here to help out as much as possible, but there is also your performing rights organization there that can really, really help steer careers, and they've done so. I worked for BMI and was one of those, A&R executives at BMI that did that with film and TV composers. So I would recommend, obviously, registering songs, but just trying to, it's an excuse to have that relationship with your local PRO, if anything.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, registering all those administering all those registrations, like Brian said, is why he spent summer at his lake house. So it just helps if someone else can do it. This question from Holly looks like it's specific to TuneCore. So I think, Chris, we're going to ask it to you. Can you renew your publishing agreement with TuneCore after the first 12 months? I guess, does it automatically renew?
Yeah, so it automatically renews quarterly. So yeah, it automatically happens, and then you're not tied in for a year at a time. It just renews quarterly. You just have to let us know if you wanted to terminate 45 days before the end of that quarter. So it automatically renews your goods. And if you submit songs to us, we'll continue to register them. So yeah, you're all good.
So this question is from Nicole. She says, and this is an interesting question, I think, for all of you, if you've ever written with someone else on any co-writes. Is there a standard split percentage for someone who just does a hook or just does one verse? So this is kind of speaking to co-writing. What's that, Mike?
I was just going to say that when it comes to percentages, there are no rules at all. It's just what is everyone comfortable with. And it's the same thing with hiring a manager or an agent. Some take 5% and some take 25%. And it's just however much you agree on is what everyone agrees on. And if you get a larger percentage of a business, perhaps you'll work harder in that business. So, but my brother and I do everything 50-50. And most of the other people we work with are work for hire. So they get paid to play a track. And we have a few other arrangements with a few musicians where we all get a third. That's just how we work. But I've heard people do things like you get 11% and you get 19% and you get 24%. And that's just, if everyone's happy, that's the agreement. That's what I know. So
that's what we think.
That's what we think.
Yeah.
It's from the Silverman Brothers.
Yeah.
CJ, I know that there's a lot of co-writing that happens in hip hop music. Do you think it's best to get that figured out in the room?
Yeah, so that's the general rule of thumb in the industry I'm in. So sometimes the artist may decide to just take an upfront cut. Let's say they want a certain amount and they don't care about getting the royalties. And then some artists say don't worry about anything up front. We'll just do a split 50-50 or 20-80. So it really varies from the situation. Just like the Silverman brothers said, it depends on your relationship with that person or what you decide on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when the Silverman brothers when Mike was speaking about work for hire, it means it's a one-time payment. You're not getting any royalties on the back end. So just to make sure everybody understands that terminology. Terrell asks, where do organizations such as Sound Exchange fit into the publishing licensing scheme?
So Sound Exchange is, it's not actually anything to do with publishing. This is, when I talked earlier on about the two different copyrights that are created, the composition and the sound recording, or the master. Some people refer to it as a master. Sound Exchange is a company that focuses in on the performance royalty for the sound recording. So, they're an equivalent to BMI and ASCAP, to simplify things. And they collect performance royalties for the sound recording, neighboring rights. This is what's referred to as neighboring rights. It's the neighboring right to the performance royalty on the composition. So services like Pandora, Sirius XM, terrestrial radio outside of the US is not paid in the US, cable TV, music channels. These are businesses that pay a performance royalty on the sound recording. And so I would highly recommend that you go register with Sound Exchange. We don't actually register those works for you at present, but I would strongly encourage artists to register with Sound Exchange, get their sound recordings registered there.
You're all registered with Sound Exchange, I assume.
Yes.
Yes, we are.
And the best way to describe those types of royalties are what I think is non-interactive. So if you can't choose what the next song is, that's the kind of royalty that Sound Exchange is collecting on. Which is why
Yeah,
Pandora-
I think they collect on non-interactive, but not premium on Pandora now.
Right.
So it's just like really all over
because
the
you can
map.
choose what's.
No, even if it's, because with premium you can choose, but you don't have to choose. It still could be radio, but they still don't pay for that. It's very confusing.
It is confusing. Okay, Anonymous asked, if someone did a cover of my song, would I be entitled to proceeds of the instrumental or the lyrics if they did not receive prior authorization from me? So that's a good question. There's two questions in there. Do you have to get permission to cover a song? And this other one is, am I entitled to proceeds?
Section 115 of the US Copyright Act means that providing you've already released the song yourself first, someone doesn't necessarily need your permission. They just need to notify you that they have done this version, and then they need to account to you quarterly. So if somebody's done a cover version of your song, their money should be flowing through. If it isn't, we could go and try and find it for you. It all depends, if it's not got any streaming in numbers or if there's no activity on it. But certainly for, releasing it on CD or vinyl or interactive streaming, they don't necessarily need your permission. However, if it was used in a TV show, it's been licensed to TV, then absolutely you need 100% your permission should have been granted.
Okay. We have one more audience question from another anonymous member who's asking if there is a standard royalty rate made per stream. I think you discussed that earlier.
Yeah, it kind of fluctuates. It really depends. I mean, there is, it's 10.5% of revenue, and you may have seen press recently from the Copyright Royalty Board actually decided to increase royalties 44% over the next 5 years for the mechanical royalty obligation that Spotify, Amazon, etc. has to pay. And then those companies have appealed that. So there is a set formula. There is a statutory rate, and it's really a percentage of revenue less performance royalties, which are pay TV or PRO. So it's a complicated formula. It's not like a CD where it's 9.1 cents per composition per unit. There is a set rate, and it also fluctuates because if you think about it this way, I believe in Australia, it has one of the highest penny rates for Spotify on the mechanical royalty side. But it also has the most premium users and the least amount of listeners within that premium. So the pool of money is wider. Whereas in America, there's a lot of premium subscribers on Spotify, for example, and a lot of people listening. So the pool of money shrinks.
Right.
So, I think roughly speaking at the minute for 1 million streams, and this rate changes, but it's about $9 for 1 million streams, combining your performance royalty and your mechanical royalty. But that will change from territory to territory. In the UK, it's about £1,000. It really depends on the territory. So yes, there is a set rate in the US. The rate fluctuates from quarter to quarter. It also changes from territory to territory. So there isn't a straightforward answer. But yeah, it is.
For the most part, if you're going through raw numbers, it's probably Spotify's about 0.4 of a penny. Apple Music's about 0.8 of a penny. Amazon is on the premium side is a penny or 0.4 of a penny.
The distinction here is the blended rate versus the premium.
That is completely blended. Yeah.
Yeah. If the blended rate is about that. But the premium rate is more. So what I referenced, is the premium rate. If somebody has a Spotify premium subscription, it pays a higher rate than if they have the ad-based subscription. So, that's what I mean. You can't really put a number on it because there are so many factors that, this is why publishers and performing rights organizations don't go out there and really say, well, this is the rate, because there's so many factors and it varies, considerably.
Cool. We're just right up against the hour, and we have one more question I want to squeeze in from Ashanti, who asks, when sending music to record labels and A&R people as a songwriter / producer, is it necessary or important to register it with a PRO first? I
think whenever you're putting your music out there anywhere, it's good to have it registered. I just think it's good to set that record. stuff can happen pretty quickly. You know, music can get out there and can be cut and recorded and released, and gosh, it's out there. So I would just always, again, the point I made earlier on, start building that relationship with your performing rights organization. You know, it's an excuse. I've registered a song. Hey, I'm a songwriter at ASCAP now. You know, can I speak to somebody and get some advice? So I think when you consider it that way, it's important to do so the minute that you decide to start sharing your music, whether it's internally within the business or out there, you know, releasing it. That makes sense.
It does. Yeah, Mike, what did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say that the answer is you should never send your music to record companies at all. You should release your own music on TuneCore, and you should hire your own people to promote and so on. It really is almost I mean, everyone I know that's done it has regretted it. And so don't sign a record deal. Just release your music on TuneCore. That's my answer.
You'll do much better.
You'll do much better.
Yep.
The opinions expressed on this webinar are
Are those of TuneCore?
Yeah, no.
Convenient for the TuneCore executive sat on the panel.
no,
Although the best thing that ever happened to me was not to be rejected by the major record companies. Absolutely.
That's right.
Sorry, Amy.
Oh, no, not at all. So as a thank you for watching our live sessions, everybody who's attending is going to receive 20% off of our publishing administration service, which is a pretty good offer. Publishing administration registers works in over 100 countries worldwide, and you can register an unlimited amount of works for a flat fee through TuneCore, and that fee with your discount is going to be $60. And that offer, I think, expires September 30th. You're going to receive a code in an email that we're going to send you after we wrap. So I want to thank Brian, Chris, CJ, Mike, and Rob for joining us. You guys have been great and you've made it fun. Publishing is a very complex topic, so I definitely encourage you to check out the FAQs on TuneCore's website and follow everybody, all these folks on their social channels, because they're probably talking about what they're working on and how they made it happen. So thanks everyone for joining us for TuneCore's live session.
Thanks for the opportunity. That was great.
Thank you.